Everyone believes I'm loyal, but I've been secretly meeting my ex in a haunted mansion at midnight, and before you throw your popcorn at the screen I should probably introduce myself like a person and not a plot twist. I'm Nina, 31, a city paramedic who keeps other people alive for a living and keeps her own mess tucked neatly behind a smile and a ponytail. The kind of woman who can threaten fall in the back of a moving ambulance yet somehow can't stop texting the boy who first taught her what it meant to want something that was bad for me and good for the part of me that refuses to be quiet. I know how it sounds. Haunted mansion? Midnight? Do I also faint artistically when thunder rumbles? I don't. I carry a trauma shiz on my keychain and a stubborn streak in my chest. I've knelt in alleyways that felt haunted by nothing but poverty. Still, there's a real house and it has a name too grand for the peeling paint, Grantham House, set back on a hill that used to be a farm and is now just rumor and weeds. The windows blink with the slow eyelids of a building that's tired of pretending it isn't lonely. I swore off Max years ago, this is the ex, then I met him again in daylight at the grocery store of all places, his hand around a bunch of cilantro like he'd just invented green, and it wrecked me how quickly my brain remembered both the taste of his mouth and the sound of our favorite lie, "We're better now." "Hey," he said, and didn't turn it into anything bigger, which made it bigger. "How's the hero work?" he teased, because that's how he copes with the fact that I put on gloves and climb into strangers' disasters. I said it was heavy and holy and often just paperwork. He laughed, softer than I remembered. "You still biting your lip when you're deciding if you'll tell the truth?" he asked, and I realized I was. I changed the subject so fast I got emotional whiplash. "You still fixing houses?" I asked, because once upon a life he did renovations with a grace that made a hammer look like a violin bow. He nodded. "Working on Grantham," he said, casual, like he was saying he'd started running again. Well, it doesn't like being saved." And I said without thinking, "Grantham's haunted," and he grinned like a light turning on in a room I thought was condemned. "So am I," he said. "Want to see who wins?" The virtuous answer would have been no. But virtue rarely stands a chance when nostalgia picks the lock and invites itself in. We didn't set a time then. I went back to the ambulance and he went back to cilantro, and later I made dinner for Liam, my boyfriend, steady as a metronome, kind, overworked, a math teacher who can explain fractions to 11-year-olds and convey to me without trying that the world can be organized if you breathe. Liam and I are the kind of couple who remember to charge each other's phones and forget to say the complicated things out loud. He thinks I'm loyal because I am loyal in 80 of 85 ways. He thinks haunted houses exist only in literature because everything he believes has a graph somewhere to support it. That first night it was raining like a decision, and I drove out to Grantham after my shift because the city smelled like wet copper and I wanted air that hadn't touched sirens. I told myself I was only going to look at a construction site because I like old buildings and I owe myself the romance of ruin. My phone lit up with Liam's goodnight, 3 words, a moon emoji, a heart that he uses like punctuation, and I sent back a photo of my boots puddle deep, which could have been anywhere because lying is easier with landscapes than with faces. Max was waiting under the portico like a kid who'd been caught playing adult. He lifted a lantern, not a metaphor, a literal rechargeable lantern, construction chic, and the light threw his cheekbones into theater. "You came," he said, as if there was a version of me that wouldn't. Inside, the air smelled like damp wood and possibility. The foyer still had its chandelier, but it wore dust like a fur coat, and something scurried in a wall with the confidence of a tenant. My breath did that small hitch it does when I'm about to make a choice that will need an apology later. I didn't kiss him. We moved through rooms like a tour group of 2, our footsteps soft because big spaces punish noise. He told me the story he told the Historical Society, a family with money but no luck, a daughter who wrote poems and then disappeared into marriage, a son who tried to farm ghosts and went bankrupt, a widow who turned the house into a waiting room and never got called back. "They say you can hear a woman singing on the 2nd floor," he said, and the way he said it made it obvious he'd been listening. Every midnight after that was a hinge. We'd meet on the porch, sometimes we brought coffee like sinners trying to gentrify our guilt, sometimes we brought nothing but language. We made rules because we're both bad enough to need them and good enough to try. No touching, no telling, no drinking, no striking matches, just to watch things burn. We'd wander apart and meet again in doorways like we were being choreographed by a patient ghost. I found a small room with wallpaper the color of a mistake and a window that looked east, and I claimed it the way stray cats claim fences. I'd stand there and watch the line of dawn like it meant me personally. You think haunted means glamorous, wind and whispers and an antique mirror that knows your secrets. Most nights it meant a house settling into its shame, the groan of beams, the tick of cooling pipes, the sound of rain doing exactly what rain is supposed to do. But the second-floor hall really did have a trick of acoustics, a curve or a cough in the wood, and if you stood near the end and hummed, the air would return your note with a voice not entirely yours. The first time it happened, I laughed and then couldn't stop because laughter is basically panic in a dress. Max came running, stepped right up to that invisible echo spot and said, "Whoever you are, sing with me," and he sang badly, loudly, tenderly, like a man asking forgiveness from the architecture. The house sang back. I swear it did. Not words, not even a melody. Just a thread of sound that tied us to the wallpaper and the rain and whatever the past left out for us to trip over. We didn't touch. Did I say that? We didn't touch. That's how you absolve yourself when you're making a collage out of technicalities. We were careful with proximity the way you're careful with gasoline. I told myself the meetings were my version of urban exploration, my paramedic brain feeding on the adrenaline of forbidden places so I didn't need to crash my real life. It felt almost wholesome except for the part where I couldn't tell the person who deserved to know me. I'd crawl into bed before dawn smelling like plaster and pine, and Liam would roll toward me, still asleep, and find my hand. I'd lie there counting my pulse and wishing for a siren so I could run away and call it work. At the station, I started telling stories and cutting out the nouns. Late call last night, I'd say, and leave out how the late call was the house telling me about her floorboards. Had to improvise with old hardware, I'd say, and not mention that the hardware was a doorknob that came off in my hand like a rotten tooth. My partner, Jessa, the kind of woman whose laughter makes you confess crimes you haven't committed, asked me if I was sleeping or if I was seeing someone or if I'd started microdosing chaos. "You're brighter and dimmer," she said. "You look like somebody changed your batteries and forgot to screw the plate back on." I told her I was fine because it's the easiest sentence in English when you work in emergency medicine. Fine is a tarp. One night, Max brought blueprints, curling at the edges, the paper so old it felt like skin. We knelt on the dusty floor, shoulder to shoulder because rules are easier to keep when you give them geometry, and he traced the rooms with his finger, telling me where walls used to be, where someone had boxed up grace to make space for something modern and ugly. "I think if we open this," he said, "the house will breathe again." He looked up at me then and something in his face made me remember 23. Our apartment that smelled like paint and optimism, the bed on the floor, the avocado plant we believed in like religion, how we broke because I wanted steadiness and he wanted wind. "In the blueprint room," he whispered, "I thought I'd married myself to chaos, but turns out I just needed to work with things that let me fix them." He drew a line in the air between us. "You never let me," he said. I felt it like a palm against my sternum. "I'm not drywall," I said, trying to make a joke out of history. He smiled sad. "No," he said. "You're the foundation. I just didn't know how to pour." We kept not touching until we didn't. It wasn't dramatic. There was no thunderclap that blessed our stupidity. I had a bad call, a teenager with the kind of wound you get when a fight escalates into a future, and I came out of the ER buzzing like a power line, the white of hospital hallways settling heavy in my eyes. I drove to Grantham without thinking because the house had become my confessional. Max was in the foyer, hands covered in lime dust, his shirt marked with the day's arguments. He saw my face and without asking reached for me and I let him, and that was the moment loyalty tripped and fell on the stairs. It was a long hug, the kind that recalibrates your spine. There was nothing sexy in it and everything dangerous. When we stepped back, I had tear tracks on my cheeks and his palm print on my back and a hypothesis about myself I didn't like. Maybe I loved him most when I needed saving and he loved me most when he could try. After that, our rules became like old safety posters, present, visible, largely ignored. A kiss by the window. Another on the back steps. We were careful with the rest because we both knew what shattering feels like and neither of us wanted to sweep that kind of mess again. We talked more than we touched, which can be its own intimacy. He told me how he'd messed up badly with a woman who wanted a house he didn't have the money or the patience to build yet. I told him how Liam made me feel both cherished and supervised, and how that contradiction was mostly my doing. His not checking my oil, I said. His asking if the car needs maintenance. But I hear checking. Max nodded like his own ribs knew the grammar. People in town started making jokes about Grantham's ghosts getting frisky. The construction crew said their tools moved themselves. A neighbor swore she saw a candle moving in a window like someone was writing in flame. Rumor is oxygen for places like that. The house doesn't have to do anything but stand there and people will climb into their own heads and come out spooked. I liked the idea that the house was on our side, that it wanted us to keep showing up. That's how selfish I'd gotten. I recruited a building to justify my choices. There was a night the house decided to be theatrical. Wind came up like a chorus and all the doors thumped once as if asked to present themselves. On the second-floor landing, I felt the temperature drop, a soft ring in the ears, the sensation I only get in certain trauma rooms when time contracts to a pinpoint and then lifts its shoulders. I hummed, and the hall gave my note back to me with a harmony that was not mine, a third below, low and sad. Max's face changed. He stepped into the sound like he could build scaffolding under it. "Okay," he said, a contractor at a baptism. "Okay." We stood there until the air warmed and the house exhaled. I don't have a rational explanation, and I don't need one. Some hauntings get to be metaphor and some want to be menacing and some are just physics wearing romance. All I know is my body registered presence and not just his. I didn't tell Liam. Do you see the pattern? I kept trying to solve guilt with silence, which works exactly as well as treating a hemorrhage with a band-aid. Liam started noticing I smelled like rain at strange hours. He started noticing I had a new calm I couldn't account for, the kind of calm you get when you're double-booked in your heart and both appointments make you feel important. He asked if there was someone else. I said, "No, not the way you mean," which is the kind of sentence that tries to be a bridge and becomes a trapdoor. He nodded like a man reading a graph whose curve he doesn't like and can't argue with. Jessa noticed too. In the ambulance at 3 a.m. after we'd dropped a guy who'd mistaken drywall dust for cocaine, I cannot make people smarter. I can only keep them alive long enough to have another chance to try. She leaned back and said, "You look like someone who keeps going home to the wrong house." I laughed, too sharp, and she lifted a brow that could read minds. "If he's not hurting you," she said carefully, "then you're the one doing the hurting. And if you're the one doing the hurting, figure out if it's because you're bored, scared, or hungry." I told her she should do TED Talks between overdoses. She flicked my ear and said, "Stop making jokes where a door should be." The door presented itself in a dumb, small way. Liam forgot his lunch. He swung by my station to drop off a book I'd been wanting, a small kindness that should have been nothing but light. He left a note on my locker with a doodle of me as a superhero. I came back from a run and found it, and something inside me cracked like ice in a glass. Because in that second I decided I wanted to deserve the way he loves me more than I wanted to be loved by all my younger ghosts. That night, when Max texted midnight, I stared at the word until it lost its shape. I typed, "I can't keep coming," and deleted it and typed it again and sent it before the coward in me could edit it into poetry. He didn't reply. At 12:09 my phone buzzed. "Okay." No punctuation. The next day, a photo, the foyer filled with light, dust like confetti. "We opened the wall," he wrote. "The house is breathing." I stared at the image until it wobbled. I wanted to be two people so badly I almost called a manufacturer. I went once more. Of course I did. I told myself I was going to say goodbye to the house because the house deserved a ceremony. Max was there, hands in pockets, the shape of a man who has learned to greet loss without trying to remodel it. We walked through the rooms. The echo in the hall sang us a note I decided was approval because I needed it to be. At the window with the east light, I leaned my forehead against the glass and said, "I can't keep living like a weather forecast." He stood behind me and said nothing for a long time because sometimes the kindest thing is to be a wall someone can lean on without questions. When I turned, he stepped back. His learned too. "You're choosing him," he said, "not a verdict." I'm choosing one house and seeing if I can make it beautiful, I said, and he smiled at the metaphor even as it pushed him out of the frame. We hugged like adults who know what they're not doing. He kissed my hair, brother gentle. If you ever need a contractor, he said, and I laughed because he'll always be punny until death do us both a favor. If you ever need a medic, I said. I always need a medic, he said, and it was the wrong kind of true. Liam and I are not suddenly perfect. We are suddenly honest. I told him about Grantham. Not all of it, some details belong to the house and some to my shame, but enough to move us out of the polite apartment where Silence did the dishes. He cried. I cried. We ugly negotiated what trust looks like when it's been set on fire and asked to come back with better skin. We see a counselor who keeps tissues in a tasteful box and asks me to put the word haunted away and instead say hungry. It's humiliating how correct that is. I am hungry for a self that gets to be both necessary and desired. I am learning to ask for that where I live instead of looting it from history. Do I believe in ghosts? Yes. I believe in the kind that lives in your childhood and taps your ankle bone when you try to walk somewhere new. I believe in notes in hallways that don't belong to you and in houses that remember how you stood in them and hope you come back. I believe in exes who know the early draft of you and in the wild idea that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not visit that draft after midnight. Sometimes, on my nights off, I drive past Grantham and sit in my car with the windows down. The house looks almost smug with its new breathing wall. Once I saw a light upstairs and heard, very faintly, someone humming. It could have been the wind. It could have been the electrician. It could have been the woman I was, echoing through a place that let me be complicated. I put my hand to my throat and hummed back a thread of sound, and the air gave me myself with a harmony I can live with. At work, Jessa asks less and watches more. You look screwed together, she said last week, which from her is a benediction. Liam has started leaving me little notes in irrational places, the freezer, my gym bag, inside my boots, each one a tiny stake in the ground that says, "We live here now." One of them said, "Is the house still haunted?" and I wrote on the back, "Only when I drive past hungry," and put it on the fridge like a recipe I'm learning by heart. I still carry the trauma shears. I still climb into strangers' worst nights and try to help them back to morning. When we got a call for a man who fell off a ladder painting a front porch, I knelt on the boards, gloved and focused, and somewhere in the back of my head a mansion hummed like a tuning fork. I could feel both places in my body, and it didn't tear me, it taught me. You can be faithful to the life you've chosen and still honor the rooms that saved you while you were figuring out which key fit your door. Everyone believes I'm loyal. That sentence used to feel like a certificate I'd forged. Now it feels like a job description I said yes to and mean. It doesn't mean I don't drive past certain hills with the windows down. It doesn't mean I don't dream in wallpaper or wake at midnight and listen for echoes. It means I climb into bed with the person who loves me and tell him when the wind in my chest changes direction. It means when I hear a hymn in an empty hallway, I let it be a hymn and not an invitation. If you need a moral and maybe you don't, let it be small. Haunted is sometimes another word for hungry. Midnight is sometimes a time, not a spell. And loyalty, if it's worth anything, is not the absence of a second address. It's choosing over and over where you sleep and where you sing.